This is Beyond Perception, where it's all about breaking out of limited perception and waking up to our inherent creative genius, our human potential, our true self. I am Simon Rilling, and I have the true pleasure to speak today with Chris Tazreiter. Born in Austria, Chris has lived in Australia most of his life. He's a father, a guide, a mentor, a coach, and a sherpa to people all around the world to find that inner joy, love, and peace, where we all were born with. He's the author of the book, A PhD in Me, the founder of the PhD in Me Institute, and a podcast by the same name. In his own words, the only place where you are taught nothing and learn everything. Welcome, Chris. It's a true pleasure.
Thank you, Simon. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me.
So, when usually asked about introducing oneself, we come up with what we do. I am a teacher. In my case, I am a banker, a family father, a coach, an entrepreneur, and so on. What is your answer to who are you?
It's very different to what it used to be, because it used to be all of the things that you just said, and I just don't identify with those anymore. So, I'm life experiencing life. I'm a unique expression of consciousness and having a unique experience of life that no other person has ever had or will ever have. And whatever comes with that and whatever that means. So all the things that I've done and all the things that you would normally put into a bio or a CV are just experiences that I've had, but they're not who I am.
That's a very profound insight. I had something similar over the course of this year. Has that been something you just were born with, or what brought you to this realization?
So you could almost say that it was my PhD in me journey, because the book is a chronicle of this journey that I am on and that I've been on. So I was born into a very traditional Catholic country and raised with all the dogma of organized religion, and then taught all the dogma of traditional science, of Newtonian physics, and all of the beliefs of that traditional science, and just over time felt more and more disconnected from all that, and felt that it was all incomplete. And I guess I gave myself the gift of an insatiable curiosity, and that curiosity just started to question everything. And for 4 decades that was kind of an unconscious journey, and then at some point it became a more conscious and intentional journey of awakening, of expanding, of growing, and that just continues. So, but it's been very gentle and organic, and a step-by-step process.
And you just mentioned that a part of your journey was unconscious,
Yes,
seeking for answers, but then it turned into a conscious longing.
yes.
Was there a moment of awakening or a special situation which led to this awareness?
There was one experience, and it's documented in the very start of my book. It was my mother's final gift to me. I had a very close best friend relationship with my mother, and her parting gift to me was the time and the place and the way in which she left this life. So after a 6-month struggle with cancer, she was on her deathbed, and I was there by her side when she took her last breath. And I stood there and watched as the life left her body, and within a few minutes, I was standing there looking at my mother's body, and I came to the realization so clearly that that body was just an empty shell. It was no longer my mother. And I realized at that point that the body that gave birth to me and the body that I hugged and that I loved as my mother was not actually who she was, that the essence that I just watched leave was who she really was, and that body in the outer part was a mode of transport. It was the vehicle that she used to experience life through, but it wasn't who she was. And so that was probably the most spiritual experience that I've had up until this point. And it started the conscious part of this journey. It started an intentional path of, I guess, investigating everything that was put into me as a child when I went through what I refer to as a domestication process, the way a wild animal is domesticated and taught to live in the confines of fences and cages and boundaries. That's, I was born with nothing but pure potential, but then the world decided it wanted to teach me everything that it thought was right and all of its beliefs. And so in those early years, I was an involuntary participant in that process, and that process created my operating system, my learned beliefs. And so at some point, I became aware that I was questioning all of that more and more, that I was identifying what are the beliefs that are triggering my reactions, my thoughts, my words, my behavior, and are those beliefs really true? And do they really serve me well? And so then I started to intentionally replace them with new beliefs. And that, again, is what I refer to as my PhD in me. And that's the invitation that I feel so strongly to extend to the rest of the nearly 8 billion people on this planet, those that are ready to hear it. Because what I watched and what I observed in me, like in the last 2 decades, was such a massive transformation from what my worldview and my life view was then to what it is now. And I thought, if one little wood duck like me can go through that bigger change in such a relatively short period of time, then 8 billion people can do it. And I sense that the impulse is in all of humanity now to expand to a new level of consciousness. It doesn't mean that everybody's ready to hear it, doesn't mean everybody's ready to listen to it and act on it, but for those people who are, this book is like an invitation to go down that path of self-exploration.
Wow, what a story. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. You mentioned that we are born with pure potential. Was it an experiential realization? Was it a logical, intellectual approach to come to this conclusion?
That's a really good question, because what I observed is that the way that I started to learn and to watch and observe the learning process is that my day-to-day interaction with people and with the planet and with life brings me endless amounts of information and endless amounts of new information. And at that point, it's just information. And if I study that information and take it in, it becomes knowledge. But at that point, it's just knowledge. And if I really, really focus and learn and memorize that knowledge, it at best still only becomes philosophy. But it's not until I actually experience it and feel it and it becomes part of the experience of my life, then does it become my truth. And it almost becomes part of me, and it almost becomes part of my DNA. So that's kind of the process that I've observed. And each little step of expansion, and I have to say, one of my favorite things to watch is me changing my mind. I love observing when I'm changing my mind, when my mind is expanding, And it's almost like if it hasn't happened for a little while, I start getting twitchy and say, gosh, it's been a while since I've taken on a new thought and a new idea and a new belief. So, but I often, in my mind, picture it as sort of incremental little steps. And each new aha moment, each new belief is another little step. And then sometimes there's a flat space where I sit with that, and it takes time for that to become experienced and felt and part of my life. And then there's another little step. And so it's just in those increments that this whole process has happened and continues to happen. And it feels like my understanding of the universe is that the universe is constantly expanding, and that's what I'm doing. It's like the purpose of my life and of our life is to make known the unknown, which means what do I not know yet? What have I not experienced yet? What hasn't come into my consciousness, my experience of life? And so the purpose of my life is not to get to a point and say, oh, I know something, and then put down my stake and defend that place and defend that position, because it's almost like, well, it's all over now. I'm just waiting for entropy to come and take my body. But it's this invitation to constantly continue to make known what is not known to me yet.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. One of the questions which just arose is, you talk about you observing your mind, and that
Yes.
might for some of the listeners not yet be so straightforward to differentiate between me, and I'm curious to hear your answer about who is me, but then also to differentiate between the mind and not identify ourselves with what we are thinking. And you also talk about that you're discovering beliefs which you relate
Yes.
to the upbringing, or the kind of the operating system we built by modeling our surrounding. Yep. And then you're replacing it. Like, how do you decide with what you're replacing it? Like, yep. Is it like, do you make something up, or is it like from what perspective do you decide what's the truth, or what makes more sense?
So the first part of your question, I was almost drawn back to the very first page of the PhD in Me, which starts with 3 short sentences. To know that you know nothing is a great knowing. To know that you know everything is the ultimate understanding. All that remains is to discover who you really are. So the part of me that knows that it knows nothing is my ego and my personality and my external self. And that I am of the opinion that whatever we consider to be true, all through the history of humanity, has always been expanded and superseded because more knowledge and more information has come along. And that's at a collective level, for humanity and individually. So I've always been in love with that quote from Socrates, who said that they call me the wisest man in the world, but I'm the only one who knows that he knows nothing. Right? So the outer part of me understands that what I think I know is constantly shifting and changing. So I have a view and a perspective at this moment, and the Chris that's talking to you is happy to share that view and that perspective, but I needed to let go of the need to be right, because if I understand that had Chris spoken to you 6 months ago or 5 years ago, you would have had a completely different view and insight from me, because I was at a different place of understanding. And if I speak to you in 6 months' time or in 5 years' time, it will be different again. So at what point can I possibly say that I was right? And the answer is never. So the first thing in me says, gosh, if humanity can only grasp that, there will never be any conflict ever again, because if we let go of the need to be right, and we know that we're just making up a story, and that story is constantly evolving and changing and growing and expanding, we can't ever be right. Right? So that's the first part. And then there is that essence that I referred to when I was talking about watching my mum's essence leave her body. That's the consciousness in me that is connected to the larger consciousness of the universe, which some people call the void, some people call the unified field, some people call it the Akashic field, and some people call it God. It doesn't really matter how you refer to it. But my understanding is that the consciousness in me experiencing life is part of that greater consciousness experiencing itself through each individual energy signature, or however you want to refer to us, right? And that's the part that knows everything. So the more I learn to listen to my inner voice and my intuition, then the answer to your question emerges from that, because my experience of life all day and every day is filled with new information coming to me from endless sources, and invariably from people, because we're all here co-creating this reality and co-creating this life. And we all have our own unique set of learned beliefs, and we all have our own unique experience of life. So I'm not sure that this journey could go the way that it is going if I was sitting in a cave or on a desert island by myself, because I'm not experiencing my experience of life in the way where I'm recognizing what my learned beliefs are doing, what they're creating, how I'm interacting with people, with triggers, with circumstances. And so the information that's causing the expansion comes from every possible source. You know, it can come from science, it can come from the observation of animals, it can come from a good conversation with Simon, it can come from traumatic experiences that I have, right? But none of those things ever have a meaning until I attach a meaning to it. And of course, that comes from having a thought. And so I'm thinking, what thought am I having about this? And what's the belief that's triggering the thought that I'm having about this piece of information, or this interaction, or this traumatic event, and whatever else? Because I can put 10 people into the same situation, and you could almost guarantee that they won't have exactly the same reaction and the same response to it, right? And so all of those things are fueling that endless journey of information coming at me. And then the one thing that remains is, do I have an open mind or a closed mind? Because a closed mind looks at new information and says, do I believe the source that it's coming from, and does it fit into my view of the world and of life? And if not, well, I just reject that information as being false. And I've probably been in that space in the past. But as I watched my mind open up more and more, when a new piece of information comes at me, I never ever reject anything as being impossible, and I never automatically accept something as automatically being the truth. And so the question about, should I bring into my belief system, if something is meant to become my truth, it will never appear only once, and it will never appear from just one source. It will reappear, and it will come from different places, and oh yeah, and maybe the first time it was nothing more than a seed thought, and then the second time the seed starts to germinate, and so it grows. And ultimately the answer comes how it feels inside of me, because every time I learn something that I'm meant to learn, it never feels like I'm learning something new. It feels like I'm remembering something that I already knew. And that for me is the key answer to your question. It feels like I'm remembering something rather than learning something new.
There are quite a few interesting things you mentioned. One, from own experience, is that you encourage to not defend our knowledge, from what I understand.
Yes.
And
Yes.
also, you mentioned it a couple of times, let go of the need to be right. And that sounds so simple, but it's not necessarily not necessarily easy, because from
Yes.
own experience, I identified myself with what I know and my profession, and I had no sense like of whatsoever what there else could be than the knowledge, my achievements. And for me, it seemed so scary. Like if I admit that I don't know everything,
Yes.
what is left? Because I'm just
Yes.
my achievements and my knowledge. And if I'm not right, I'm wrong. Like I am wrong because that's my identity. And
Yeah.
so depending where you come from, it's not so easy, or it's not really straightforward to even accept the possibility that there is something more. And one of the things I also have mentioned to you before, you have this gift of explaining complex topics in really simple terms to, I guess, also help people who are possibly not yet aware of all these concepts, or maybe not even consciously seeking
Yes.
about waking up. How have you found a way to intrigue them or help them to accept that there is a window or a door through which is actually very rewarding to walk through? Like,
Yeah. So I would be the first person to say that I'm constantly learning what it is that you're asking. But one of the really important things was that I had to come to the understanding that I needed to let go of the outcome, that I cannot convince anybody of anything, and that all I can do is just show up authentically as me and share whatever I can share in a particular moment or with a particular person, and then let go of the outcome so that it doesn't energetically matter for me whether that person agrees with what I'm saying, whether they understand it or not, because I have no idea what journey that person is on and has been on, and how those things will land with that person. And it may be that I simply sow a seed thought that germinates a long, long time after, when I'm not in the picture, but that's all part of the process, and that's all perfectly okay. So all I want to do, and it's funny because at the beginning of the website, the very first thing that I wrote is that this is the only place where you are taught nothing and you learn everything. And that is really, that goes to the heart of what the PhD in me is, because I don't want to teach anybody anything because I don't know anything. I'm just on a journey of constantly expanding my view and my understanding and my perspective on things. And I will happily share that. And then people take whatever value is appropriate for them at that particular time.
so would you say that you are teaching a process of how to live, and not about telling or
Yeah.
teaching people about what they should be believing or considering the world to be?
I'm helping people give themselves permission to go down this path and give themselves permission to explore. There are two important things at the beginning of the book. One of them, a traditional PhD in academia has a thesis that it's based on. And the thesis of my PhD in me is that everything I was taught as a child was either completely false or only partially true. And I have not found a single thing yet that doesn't fall into that category. And then the second part that's in there are 4 fundamental questions that I believe every human being has asked themselves since the history of humanity, either consciously or most of the time unconsciously, and that is, who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? And what am I supposed to do about it?
Apologies, there
And people have tradition.
Chris, apologies, there was a quick
Yeah, you
disturbance.
froze.
Could you repeat the 4 questions?
Yes, of course. The questions are, who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? And what am I supposed to do about it? And historically, people have turned to outside of themselves, traditionally to religion, to gurus, to enlightened people, to famous people, and whatever else for the answers to those, because they have been taught and it's been drummed into them and brainwashed that they're not good enough and smart enough to know the answers to those questions themselves. And the PhD in me is almost an, how do I put it? It expresses the view that the age of the guru is coming to an end and the age of self-mastery is emerging, so that we're being invited more and more to look within for the answers to the questions we're asking, rather than to go to an external source, which is not to say ignore the external sources, because they're all of value. And in my opinion, every single person who touches my life has something of value to teach me if I'm open to hearing it and to recognizing it, right? But I've done so many courses and read books and watched films and done webinars and whatever else. But what started to happen is that I realized that I wasn't meant to learn what the person wanted to teach me. I was meant to learn what my intuition told me was the right thing for me to learn at that moment in my journey. And because most people who teach anything, and particularly in the personal development and self-help space, people are teaching from experiences that they have had that have made a difference and had an impact in their life, right? And so what they are doing is trying to replicate that in other people and say, here are the 5 steps and the 7 secrets and the whatever else to this, this, and this. You follow these steps and then you'll have the same results and outcome that I had. The problem is it rarely ever happens that way, and very rarely do they manage to replicate the same experience that they had, because every one of their students is having a unique experience of life that doesn't match the one that the teacher had, right? And yet there is something of value in what each person is teaching if the person hearing it, if the student is listening to their inner voice and saying, what's the lesson for me, uniquely for me from this, which will be different to the person sitting on their right and which will be different to the person sitting on their left.
That makes a lot of sense. So what I understand, you're encouraging people, humans, to really become self-reliant, independent, autonomous.
Yes.
By not being dependent on a teacher or guru, like modeling someone else, but starting to live life on their terms. And
that clashes with so many systems on this planet at the moment. And there are so many systems that would fight what I just said, because their survival relies on people not doing that. So
that's one of the things I wanted to ask you, because there are teachers, authorities, gurus who disguise their ego, and like that's my thesis, and not just a thesis, but also they're seeking for power, control, authority under the message of I'm not your guru. It's not about me. It's about empowering you. And
Yes.
and it can be really difficult for a student who not has the intuition or the knowledge or experience to differentiate or see that. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't look for a teacher to really discover the real intention of possibly creating followers, a business, income, dependency. And even the teacher might not be aware of it consciously. Like the teacher
Yes.
might
Yes.
think, I'm actually empowering others.
Yeah.
And do you have a suggestion or an advice to someone, a student who like, wants to discover the true self or is looking for a teacher who's a guide? Do you have a recommendation of what they should look at? Or?
I once suffered from, and that's probably the wrong term, but observed in me the guru syndrome, so that I looked for and found certain people that I really, really admired, and I put them on a pedestal and whatever else, right? But the further I went down this journey, the more I realized that the people who I looked to as teaching me something are constantly changing. So there is nobody who I put into the category of being a teacher of mine 5 years ago who still is today. They are constantly coming and going because there is something that they are meant to teach me, and then I'm meant to move on to the next person and the next person. So I'm no longer looking for that one person that I can attach myself to, right? Because there is nobody on a pedestal and there is nobody on this journey who I consider superior or inferior to me. You know, I see a 1-year-old child as having the potential to teach me as much as the Dalai Lama or somebody who is in a figure of, you know, esteem and authority and whatever else. And so the synchronicities that I constantly experience in my life are constantly taking me to different people and different circumstances for a reason and for a purpose and for something for me to learn, right? And all I needed to do was to set the intention for me to go on that journey. But then people say, what do I need to do? And the answer is, there is nothing you have to do. You just need to allow this to unfold and to come forth and to find what's the resistance inside of me that's causing me to resist this process. So on one hand, it's the allowance, and on the other hand, it's letting go of whatever the resistance is.
And you mentioned something which resonates very much with me, that everybody is at eye levels, basically. That there is no one superior, no one inferior. And if I relate that to my question, how to find the right teacher. So if there's a teacher who presents themselves or thinks they're superior to their students, that would basically also be a recommendation to be sensitive on how the teacher treats their students.
100%. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
One of the things you mentioned before, the 4 questions, the 4 fundamental questions, and I encountered them consciously this year, end of last year. Would you suggest, I mean, you have a lot of life experience, you are working as a coach, a guide. Would you suggest that we all have similar answers to these questions? Is it very different?
No. I will never ever know truly what another person's answer to those questions is, because it's almost like it's a felt question. It's a felt answer. It's an experienced answer. And the moment that we try to bring it out too much, we go into our head. So, and it's also, I believe, such a fluid answer, because with each new expansion, with each new understanding, with each new insight, the answer to those questions shifts a little bit. So it's so fluid, and the more often I catch myself asking that question, the more I observe that the answer is a little bit different than it was last time. So there's no correct answer to that question. And I think, in my understanding, we are all part of this feedback loop with the universe and with the consciousness of the universe, that there is a reason and a purpose to each of us experiencing a unique version of life and coming to a unique answer to those questions all the way through our journey. And because we're feeding that back into the greater experience of the universe and consciousness experiencing itself.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, because the first question you shared is, who am I? And
Yes.
And so this is also continuously changing and adapting who you are, or how can I understand it?
Well, because...
Or is it more a revelation of, like, I understand more of who I am?
Yes, it's an expansion. It's an expansion. There's a photograph in my book which I found years ago, and it really, really appealed to me. And it's a picture of a little child standing there with the universe in the background and all the stars and whatever else. And the child is sort of reaching up, and it's almost like the universe is part of the child and the child is part of the universe, and it's just constantly reaching outwards to expand itself and its experience of life. And so part of the quest for knowledge, and that can go to those 4 questions, is that the expansion never ceases and the understanding never ceases. And the greatest gift for me in seeking knowledge is to first say, I don't know, right? And so every time I ask those questions, I actually start from the premise that I don't know, not what was my answer last time, but I don't know the answer to these questions. And in me asking that question, I observed this process that when I ask a question, the question and the answer come into existence simultaneously. They're energetically linked, and they come forth at the same time. And then it's a question of, am I prepared to listen for the answer? Because the answer's coming from the inside, not from the outside. And the world shouts and my inner voice whispers. So often when we ask a question, we then look to the world outside to give us the answer. But the answer is contextually linked to the question. So the only really right answer to my question has to come from me, because if it comes from somebody else, it's coming from a different context and a different worldview and a different life view. So part of my understanding is that I can never give somebody else an answer to their question, because it will be my answer. It won't be their answer, right? And the same applies to me. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense.
It's super interesting, and I don't want to be too technical about it. What you say, that who you are, it is, and if you're describing that it like it is expanding, it's just remembering more of who you are, but who you are, it's still the same. So it is. And is it the same for every one of us? You mentioned a few times you sensed your true essence, and when you described your experience with your mother, that that she was not her physical representation.
Yes.
Like, so then would you suggest, like, the answer to who am I is the same for every one of us, that we are not just our body, but and like, and also,
So,
what would you suggest is the purpose of having this physical experience from your own view?
I'm resisting where you're taking the question to. I'm resisting answering it with yes, it's the same for all of us, right?
That's fine.
Because at that moment we're making it a logical answer.
Okay.
But it's an experiential answer. It's a felt answer, and so the feelings and the emotions and the experiences in each person experiencing life are unique, and I can never presume to know what it feels like to experience each moment as Simon is experiencing it, because even if I'm having the same experience, I already understand that my interpretation of that experience will be different to yours and to the next person, right? And so the moment I say the answer is the same for all of us, it's almost for me like I'm shutting down the expansion and the exploration, because what brings me so much joy is for you and I to share our current answer to that question, or with any other person, but to know full well that my answer is limited by my current understanding, my current consciousness, my current life view, world view, and whatever else. So I honor the difference in the answer in you and want that to exist so that both of our answers continue to expand and we can share them with each other and whatever else, but never get to the point of saying, we're right because we've come to the same answer, and then expand that to 8 billion people, because it feels to me like we've lost the understanding of why life exists in the first place.
Why does life exist in the first place?
You're going down a path that is such a huge and massive conversation, and you're inviting me to do something that I'm still learning to do, which is to express that in a few words, right? So I love the question. I'm still expanding my ability to answer it in a simple way. Plus, I know in advance that whatever my answer is, there are going to be many, many people for whom that's not the right answer, and that's absolutely okay, right? So I watched my observation of scientific materialism, of the old science of Newtonian physics, which says we live in a material universe where you can measure everything and everything is made of atom, and as your instruments get more finer and more precise, we can measure more and more of that universe, right? And the problem with that always was for me that they said, yeah, we can measure it all the way back 13.8 billion years to the Big Bang, but you have to allow us one miracle because we can't explain the Big Bang. So we can't tell you how and where it came from and why. We just know it happened, and then we can measure everything from then on. So allow us one miracle, and then we'll give you science through measuring everything after that, right? So that was a really incomplete story for me. And I started to gravitate more and more towards quantum physics and to what it was discovering and teaching and so forth. And I let go of organized religion and moved towards studying spirituality, and found that spirituality and quantum physics were converging more and more to telling the same story. And that same story, as I heard it, is that the universe is made up of consciousness and energy. And that all of the energy in the universe carries information and carries consciousness. But that consciousness doesn't know itself until it experiences itself. And so the whole reason for life is for that consciousness to experience itself through every entity, through every cell, through every atom, through every being on this planet and in all the other dimensions and in all the other universes. It is experiencing itself, and it is growing and expanding through that process. And so we are part of that. But in whatever way this is designed, you and I arrived here with amnesia. So we forgot where we came from, and we arrived and we forgot who we are, where we are. And we had a pretty strong intuitive understanding of it at birth, except that we go through the indoctrination process, and all of that is beaten out of us, right? And replaced by a whole heap of unhelpful thoughts and beliefs and judgments. And we're taught the power of no, and don't do this, and you can't do that, and you shouldn't do that, and you mustn't do that. And so it's like we come here and go as far away from our original source as we can possibly get, and then go through a journey of finding our way back, and growing and expanding and remembering all of that. And so that some people say that's really woo-woo. I think it's really simplistic, and I'm still learning the language to express that in ever, for me, better ways and simpler ways. But that's probably the best way that I can explain it at this moment.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing this. And you mentioned it just now and also before that we're not really learning a lot of, basically we're not learning about what you just shared with us here in school. We are taught, we're programmed, conditioned with a very different perspective on life. You mentioned before that everything, or your quote is, everything I was taught as a child was either completely false or only partially true. And you just also said that most of what we learn is not really empowering. But then the tricky thing is that we don't know what we don't know. And by design, we cannot see most of our blind spots because that's why they're called blind spots. And that's also something I have been and I'm going through. It's discovering limitations, programs, blind spots. And for someone who is listening to this conversation, and you shared a little bit before also about the process of questioning everything. And do you have an example of how someone who is new to this can make sense of what that means, or how it works, of becoming more aware and freeing ourselves from these programs? What are these programs?
Yeah. It's, I guess the first thing that I would say that it is a journey, and there is this impulse in most people that they want to arrive somewhere now. And so we're looking for someone who can tell me how to get to where I want to get to now, because I want to become wealthy, or I want to be in perfect physical health, or I want to have the perfect relationship, or I want to be enlightened, or whatever else, right? And what I observed is that it's a journey, and the journey starts with the intention. So if I picture an earlier version of Chris listening to the conversation between you and I, then I would hope that he says, what I'm listening to is something that I feel a resonance with. I feel an energetic connection to this conversation, and I would like to walk in that direction. And that for me is where this starts, right? Because if someone says to me, who are the people that are my natural audience? And the answer is, it's those people who energetically feel connected to the message in this book, who feel connected to the conversation that you and I are having at the moment, right? And so you cannot, or I cannot identify who those people are based on where they live, or how old they are, or what profession they're in. It is a process of those people identifying themselves by feeling a resonance and a connection with the energy of the conversation that you and I are having, and of the message in the book, and the programs that the PhD in Me Institute will offer when they're launched. So, yeah, and I was going to say the end result. It's not the end result, but the gift, the payoff, the reward for me is that I feel today a feeling of inner peace, of a feeling of joy and love inside of me that is my default state. So it doesn't mean that things can't happen where I get triggered or I get stressed or angry, but those things are the exception. And that feeling of inner peace is the default state that I very quickly go back to. Whereas what I observe in many people is that stress and anxiety and worry and fear and anger are the default state, which is broken up occasionally by moments of joy and of happiness and feeling peaceful, but they are temporary. And then the default state is that other state. And so for me, the experience of day-to-day life has changed as I've progressed on this journey, and as my beliefs have changed. And that on its own is enough to go on this path and on this journey, because I have come, one of my favorite thoughts and phrases in my day-to-day life is the expression, thank you for the gift of my life. I love this experience. I love every moment of it. But that was one of the things that was a gift or a consequence of consciously embarking on this journey. And that's one of the things that has emerged from that. And again, who knows where that will lead and where that will expand to. I can only express it as I feel it at this moment.
And would you suggest that each single one of us humans has the ability to live in joy, love, and peace as a default experience by becoming aware and changing or waking up to true beliefs?
I believe that that's how we were meant to live. I believe that we arrive here, and I said before, pardon me, we arrive as pure potential. So that's the potential to have any thought and any experience that we can create, that we can conceive, that we can imagine. But we also arrive as pure love. We don't arrive with all of the fear and the anxiety and the doubts and the stress and all of that. We're taught all of those things, right? And so if I can be taught something, I can also learn something different. And so the question is, am I prepared to take charge of what it is that I'm learning, as opposed to a broken system in this world that wants to teach me what serves that system? So that's what, and we're observing that more in 2020 than ever before, in terms of what we're being force-fed and spoon-fed to believe. So as part of what I'm describing, one of my basic value systems and beliefs is the principle that each one of us has sovereignty over our mind and over our body. But very few people recognize that and claim that and exercise that. So part of this journey is to give people permission to reclaim sovereignty over their thoughts and their mind, and sovereignty over their body.
No, wonderful. And when we had our last conversation, one of the things which I still remember, and it illustrates the power of beliefs, and we talked about our beliefs regarding time, and
yes,
your concept of it regarding your own life expectation, if I remember that correctly.
yes.
And I would love you to share with us your considerations and what might challenge a lot of beliefs, but also might wake people up to
what am I? My 200 plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was another consequence of this insatiable curiosity and of questioning everything, because I watched the people around me talk about their life expectancy, and I watched this collective belief that, our first 20 years is when we go through the formation and the growth and the learning phase. Then we have 30 or 40 years of our most productive time. And then we start to wind down for a while. And then we're basically sitting and waiting for entropy to take our body. And I started to question that. I started to almost sense that was a belief rather than a fact, and that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then somewhere, and I don't remember the details, I heard about a scientific experiment that went on many decades ago, where a scientist took some cells from his own body, put them into a perfect growth environment for those cells to thrive, and kept them there, and the cells that came from his own body outlived him. So he died and those cells were still alive. So, I was questioning that science is telling me that the cells in our body are constantly replacing themselves and in such and such a period of time. And again, this curiosity said something is wrong with this picture, that if my cells are constantly replacing myself with themselves, why am I aging? Why do I die? Science believes that we have a mechanical body that just wears out, but I don't believe that. And cutting edge science doesn't say that anymore, because it says that our body is simply consciousness and energy, right? And so the thought process expanded from there. And it's, well, my body's made up of 100 billion cells. What on earth causes 100 billion individual life forms to dance to the tune that is this miracle of Simon that I'm looking at, or of Chris, and every part that makes up this incredible scientific, technological miracle that is my human body? And the answer is purely and simply the consciousness that is inside my body. It controls all of it. And so that led me to believing and understanding more and more that in our natural state, we live in homeostasis, in perfect health and well-being. But all of the thoughts and the beliefs and the fear and the stress and the anxiety that we're taught in those early years create a completely different chemistry in our body than what that natural state of inner love, peace, and joy does. the chemicals that come out of my hypothalamus into my body when I'm in that state of pure joy are chemicals that heal everything that needs healing in my body. And when I'm in a state of stress and fear and anxiety and worry, there are totally different chemicals that are attacking every cell in my body. And so that immediately started to explain why we age and why our body breaks down. And so I started to play a game with myself that said, I'm going to change the belief system that I was taught. And so at first I said, okay, I'm going to set the intention to live to 100. And then it went to 200 and up to 120. And it kept progressing. And at the moment, I'm on a 200 plan. Now, there's some really important things that go with that. One is that I have no need or no desire to know when I'm going to leave this life. It's got nothing to do with that, right? But it changes your relationship with time, because the older most people get, the more they feel like time is running out. And so when there are new challenges and new opportunities and new things to experience, many people say, oh my God, I'm already 50 or 60 or 70. I don't have time to learn something new and to start a new aspect of my life, right? But when you're on a 200 plan, shit, when you get to 50, you're an adolescent. You're only a quarter of the way there, right? So what a novel concept. And so that whole game that I play with myself serves my relationship with my body. It serves that whole feeling of wellness so incredibly well. And so it's one of the things that emerged from this PhD in me journey.
You know, that makes one think.
And is it true? Is it right? It's my truth. And I will share it with anybody who wants to listen, but I will never defend it as the truth. So people in academia and in science who are sitting on different bits of information that they have learned and that has supported their tenure and their position and whatever else, and who are defending that, they don't need to argue with me, because I'm not going to defend what I know is right. But it serves me and my experience of life so wonderfully well.
It's a wonderful message. And Chris, I want to be respectful of your time, and I fear we could go on for a few more hours. To be honest, I have a lot more questions. One of the things I wanted to invite you then also to our listeners. Is there a message? Is there something you want to share with anyone listening to this?
Actually, hang on. Let me find something that came from a person that I was chatting to, and he said something really. I did not know that I could have permission to be me, to be free. And I just thought that was such a wonderful, beautiful, profound insight, that the world taught us that we're not allowed to be who we are and who we came to be, that we need to give ourselves permission and come to the realization that we actually don't need anybody's permission to authentically show up as who we came here to be, and to experience life not in the way that the world says is the norm and that we should, conform to how everybody else does it, but to just be that unique expression of life. My youngest daughter, when she was about 2 years old, became my greatest teacher at that time, because I watched this beautiful child. She sang and she danced and she laughed and she giggled and she just did whatever came forth from her. She didn't care if anybody liked it or if people thought it was good enough. When she sang, she didn't sing songs that she had learned. she actually made it up as it came out. She made up the words and the melody as it came out. And I sort of came to the realization that that's how we actually came to express life. And so my advice is, forget about being grown up, forget about being mature and responsible, and just allow that inner child that lives in all of us to have its freedom and its fun and its love of life again. And if you didn't have a childhood that allowed you to experience that, then give yourself permission to experience it. Whether you're 20 or 40 or 120 or 200, allow yourself to experience the joy and the fun of life as we potentially did and were invited to as little children. So that would be my advice.
That's an incredible message, I can tell you. And when I heard the words, it would say me nothing. Yeah, it's like, okay, whatever, like it's just words. But over just these months, this year, I'm starting to experience what it means. And I can tell you, you wouldn't trade it for any amount of money in the world. Like,
exactly.
It's the ultimate liberation to start waking up to it's okay to be you. Like, it's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Chris. And I know that you are about to launch, or you started your institute. What is it about? And can you share a bit about what you're currently working on, what you're doing, where people can learn more about what you're up to?
Well,
and also to just like, we will add all the resources to the show notes, so people will find also the link about your book.
I still am not at a place where I can send people to a website yet. Okay, so that is still some weeks away. The website is a phdandme.com, but it's not live yet, right? So there are 3 versions of the book. There's the physical book, there's an ebook, and an audio book. And it's basically for people to see whether they connect with this message and whether it resonates with them, right? And then from there, there'll be a short 7-part self-study course that goes through some of the basic concepts in the PhD in Me. There is then an invitation for people to join a 12-month group with a small number of people, perhaps a dozen people, who commit to showing up once a week for a few hours and to help and encourage and guide each other and observe each other on this journey of expansion for a 12-month period, with me guiding and facilitating that process with that group. And then there's also the option for people to engage on some one-on-one mentoring as well. So that's the initial. In the future, there is very much an intention to create and set up a retreat center for the institute, but that is still something to call into this reality. And the other part that I guess is very, very much part of this is that I have had a strong urge to take this message into the corporate world, into the whole realm of conscious business, right? So the PhD in Me will become a PhD in We, and will go out into the collective. So the first intention is to offer this for the individual journey, and then to expand it into the collective journey.
That's wonderful. My fingers are crossed. And this conversation has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for helping me, the listeners, understanding more about our real nature and how to wake up. And as mentioned,
thank you for the opportunity. And I've really, really loved just sharing whatever it is that wants to emerge next. So thank you for the opportunity.
A true pleasure. And in the show notes of this episode, we will add all the links, the resources, so people can learn more about you, PhD in Me, and follow you on social media. And thank you again for who you are, Chris, taking the
Yes,
time
thank
to
you,
be
Simon.
here, sharing your experience, and true pleasure. And I have a feeling we might have a follow-up conversation in the future.
Yes, we will.
Thank you very much, Chris.